So today we're going to start talking about a new series that I think everybody kind of stresses out a little bit about, and that's Finding God's Will. And I remember when I was a kid, oh, the days, right? I used to lose a lot of sleep worrying about it. What's my purpose in life? What's God's will for my life? And I had this idea that was a problem for the young, and when you get older, that just goes away. Well, it does not go away with age. It's a concern for really every stage in your life. When you're a kid, you wonder, I don't want to waste my life, right? But then your kids move out, and no, what do I do now? What do I do without kids? And you get older, and you start having health problems, and you wonder, what's God's will for my life? What's my purpose in life? It can sometimes be very troubling, very depressing sometimes. It's one of those things that really weighs on us a lot. It keeps us up at night, causes us to do stupid things like buy cars we can't afford when we're in our 40s. And I mean, wouldn't you agree in your own life? Haven't you ever experienced that panic of missing it? Like, what if I waste my years doing something and I can never get it back? But we all kind of want an easy solution, much like Gideon. Gideon is a man in the book of Judges who God calls to free Israel from their captivity, I should say, not from their slavery, but from their captivity. Well, it was kind of slavery, but long story. From their captivity, and he just always wants more and more and more and more validation that he's doing the right thing. We'll read it starting in verse 33. It says, "All the Midianites, Amalekites, and people of the east gathered together, crossed over the Jordan, and camped in the Jezreel Valley." These are the enemies of Israel. The Spirit of the Lord enveloped Gideon, and he blew the ram's horn, and the Abiezrites rallied behind him. He sent messengers throughout all of Manasseh who rallied behind him. He also sent messengers throughout Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, who also came to meet him. Those are tribes of Israel. Then Gideon said to God, "If you will deliver Israel by me, as you said, I will put a wool fleece here on the threshing floor. If dew is only on the fleece and all the ground is dry, I will know that you will deliver Israel by me, as you said." And that is what happened. When he got up early in the morning, he squeezed the fleece and wrung dew out of it, filling a bowl with water. Gideon then said to God, "Don't be angry with me. Let me speak one more time. Please allow me to make one more test with the fleece. Let it remain dry and the dew be all over the ground." That night, God did as Gideon requested. Only the fleece was dry and dew was all over the ground. So this is an interesting story. And a lot of times I think it's kind of used as our go-to how to discern God's will, although it really shouldn't be. The book of Judges is a book not about heroes. Judges is not about heroes. Judges is about a bunch of great characters who do some good things and some bad things. A good example of that would be Samson. Everybody knows the story of Samson, right? Long-haired hippie gets with a bunch of people he shouldn't be in relationships with. You know the story. Really super strong guy. But if you read his story, it's full of him doing a bunch of stupid things that he shouldn't have been doing. But he freed Israel, but he did a bunch of stupid things he shouldn't be doing. Same thing is true for Gideon. Gideon isn't a standard of this is how it means to be a person of faith. He did some good things, and he did some bad things. I mean, he did ultimately lead Israel to freedom. That was a good thing. But Gideon ultimately didn't trust God, and that's a bad thing. He continually put God to the test. Over and over and over again, he put God to the test. And yet somehow the fleece test has become the golden standard of Christianity. If we want to know if it's God's will, we put a fleece out. It's like in our vernacular. It's I put my fleece out. It's something we always say. It's not. Judges isn't telling us go and do likewise. Right? It's also not telling us to do a lot of the things in the book of Judges that they did. Let's look at just real briefly. We're going to scan over what Judges has to say about Gideon, and it starts in chapter 6, verse 1. We're not going to read that verse, but Gideon is hiding from the enemies of Israel, and so that they don't take his lunch money away, basically. And so then an angel comes, and he's not even aware of this. So the angel comes closer, and this is where it picks up. Then the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, "The Lord is with you, valiant warrior." Remember, he's hiding. "Oh, valiant warrior, the Lord is with you." So then Gideon says, I don't think God's with us at all. So then in verse 14, he says, the Lord turned to him and said, go in the strength you have and deliver Israel from the grasp of Midian. I am sending you. And Gideon argues with him for a little bit, and then he said to him, if I have found favor with you, give me a sign that you are speaking with me. Did you hear that? I'll read it again. If I found favor with you, give me a sign that you're speaking with me. When's the last time you've had to ask for a sign that you were speaking to somebody? Gracie and I are in the middle of a fight, right? Hey, whoa. Give me a sign that I'm actually fighting with you, my spouse. I need a sign. No, you really don't, though. So then the story goes on. So Gideon went and prepared a young goat and unleavened bread from a half bushel of flour. He placed the meat in a basket and the broth in a pot. He brought them out and offered them to him under the oak, that is to the angel. The angel of the Lord extended the tip of the staff that was in his hand and touched the meat and the unleavened bread. Fire came up from the rock. From the rock, fire comes up and consumed the meat. It's gone. And the unleavened bread, it's gone. That's also why I don't cook in the house, because my bread has a way of also catching on fire and disappearing. Then the angel of the Lord vanished from his sight. When Gideon realized that he was the angel of the Lord, he said, oh no, Lord God, I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face. Well, who did you think you were talking to? Didn't that was the whole reason why you asked for a sign? So then you think, okay, he just wants to make sure. But let's continue the story. Then Gideon said to God, if you will deliver Israel by me as you said. He already said it. Why did he have to keep testing him over and over again? God already said it. But hey, if you're going to do that thing that you said that you were going to do, I'm reminded once again of marriage. Are you ever going to take the trash out? I said that I was going to. Yeah, but the trash is still here. So are you going to take the trash out? Well, But this isn't a wife and a husband talking. This is God talking with Gideon. Then Gideon said, if you will deliver Israel by me, as you said, I will put a wool fleece here on the threshing floor. If dew is only on the fleece and all the ground is dry, I will know that you will deliver Israel by me, as you said. Okay, so then God does that. And then he gives him another one. Don't be angry with me, Lord. Let me speak one more time. Please allow me to make one more test with the fleece. This would not actually be the last test. Foreshadowing. Let it remain dry and the dew be all over the ground. That night the Lord said to him, get up and attack the camp, for I have handed over to you. Now check this out. But if you are afraid to attack the camp, go down with Purah, your servant. Listen to what they say, and then you will be encouraged to attack the camp. So he went down with Purah, his servant, to the outpost of the troops who were in the camp. So what we see, if anything, from this story is something really spectacular happens. For those who need signs, they always need more signs. And then the problem with finding signs is you start finding them everywhere. If you're looking for a sign from God, you find them everywhere. This guy cut me off when I was driving. It's a sign from God. Oh, I woke up and this is on the news. It's a sign from God. This person texted me. It's a sign from God. And everything becomes a sign from God. It's not about what the word says. It's not about any of that. It's about, hey, I feel like this is a sign. And we get into this kind of, I guess you could say, well, moving on. And the funny thing about this is Deuteronomy 6:16, which was written before Gideon, and Oprah was the judge, says, do not put the Lord your God to the test. And so what does Gideon do? He puts him to the test and puts him to the test and puts him to the test. And even when God himself speaks to him, it's not good enough. Not good enough. I need more. See, Gideon is not the example of this is how you discern God's will in your life. It's not. The Bible actually tells us how to know if something's God's will. We're going to start looking at that next week. But long story short, this is not it. So if you're not supposed to put your fleece out to test God to find his will, how do you know if it really is God? Now, as I mentioned, we're going to look at that next week, but I want to see this. We tend to overcomplicate God's will. We tend to overcomplicate it and kind of overthink it. But I will say that there are 5 things that I want to specifically mention, 5 common blocks to God's will. Now, there are other things, but these are just 5 common ones that you see. And the first one is making up your mind beforehand. You decide, and then you just look for validation to what you already want to believe. Not that we would ever do that, right? Because we always go to prayer with a pure mind and a pure motive, and we always put God's interests above our own, right? Well, maybe you do, but I know I struggle with that. And 1 Kings chapter 22 gives a phenomenal story about this. We're not going to read the whole thing. I'll just summarize. There's this guy named King Ahab. He's a very successful king. He's a very wicked man, though. But he's very successful. And he gets it in his head that he wants to go to war against his neighbor. So he asks one of his ally kings, he says, hey, I want to go to war against these guys. You in? And the other king says, hey, that sounds like a great idea. Well, I should always do business with wicked and immoral people. Let's do that. So that's what he does. But he says this. Now, before we do this, though, we should inquire of the Lord and just see what he has to say. And Ahab says, gotcha, buddy. So he assembles all of his priests and prophets that he has in his pocket, and they all unanimously come before him, and they all, oh, go, you're going to go and conquer. It's all good with you. They're making all this grand gesture. Oh, it feels good. And his ally king says, this is good and well, but isn't there anyone else that you can get the word of the Lord from? And he says, well, there's this one guy. But, I hate that guy. He always says something bad about me. I don't like him. And he says, okay, yeah, get him. And so they send the messenger out, and the messenger says, look, buddy, all these hundreds of other prophets and priests, they're all saying the exact same thing. They're saying he's going to conquer. Just go and say the same thing. Just tell him what he wants to hear. And the prophet says, I'm only going to say what the Lord tells me to say. So he goes with the messenger. He comes before King Ahab, and he says, go, King Ahab. You're going to conquer. You're going to do great. And King Ahab says, how many times? How many times do I have to make you promise you're going to tell me the truth? And he says, I saw Israel like sheep without a shepherd. You die. This doesn't go well for you. And King Ahab says, see, this is what I'm talking about. I knew he was going to say this. I knew it. I knew he had nothing but bad to say. And then, as if on cue, the prophet doesn't stop there. Then he goes and explains why this is going to happen. Because God's going to send a deluding spirit to all of these prophets, and they're going to tell you something you want to hear, and you're going to go and die. So this is his response to the prophet. So King Ahab said to Jehoshaphat, didn't I tell you he never prophesies good about me, but only disaster? So what we do nowadays is when people try and tell us something that goes against what we've already made up, we say a few couple things that I think are kind of just our go-to things in our culture. The first is, well, they're just being toxic. They're just trying to tear me down. They don't care about me. They're trying to disrupt my dreams and my hope. I need to get this kind of person out of my life. Another thing we do is a little bit more, sounds a little more spiritual, I think. They're sowing a spirit of confusion. Or maybe they're pricking your conscience because you know what you're doing is wrong. But it could just be that, and you see this happens a lot when people get involved with different cults like the Jehovah's Witness and stuff, where they come up with their mind what they want to believe, and then they just go along with it. A good example of this actually just happened a couple weeks ago. I actually had someone from the Jehovah's Witness call, and he said, hey, I have a question about the Bible. I said, okay, yeah, let's talk. And so then he accused me of some things, and I said, I get the feeling you don't actually want to talk. You want to just kind of argue. And he says, no, I want to. I said, okay, well, let me explain. And I started answering his question, and he interrupted me to tell me what he believed. And it was very apparent very quickly that he called to argue because he already knew what he believed, and he didn't want to hear anything different, which was fine. But that doesn't mean that I need to get involved with his, battle with his conscience. You also see this happen a lot with counseling. People will come into a pastor for counseling when they're having marital problems, when they've already decided to get a divorce. And what they want you to say is, wow, they really sound like a jerk. You should get a divorce. But a lot of times, we're more focused on trying to help them find restoration in their marriage. And they don't like that. It gets very cold very quickly. And the reason why is because they already know what they want to believe. They just want you to validate it. The second block that you before we get to that, I actually forgot this. There's two main reasons why this block is such a problem. It's a twofold problem. The first is delusion. And that's that we just we're misled. The thing about being misled is you never know that you're being misled. You always think it's not going to happen to me, it's going to happen to somebody else. You see this has happened in at least three places in the Bible. Number one, you see it happen. Revelation says that in the end there will be a deluding spirit that people will be misled. Number two, you see a king by the name of King Saul who kept disobeying God, And so God eventually gave him a heady spirit, a dark spirit that would come, and he would get very irrational. And then the third example that you see from Scripture is here with King Ahab. And the second part of the twofold problem is that when we desire something strong enough, we can convince ourselves of most anything. And we can use the Bible to do it too. I have literally heard the Bible be used as an excuse for how it was okay to do drugs, cheat on his wife. Yes, you heard me right. Somebody cheated on their wife, and they misused Scripture to back it up. I could go on, but I think I'll stop there. The problem is when we desire something strong enough, it doesn't matter if it's for God or against God. We can delude ourselves very, very quickly because we desire it strong enough. So then the second of the 5 common blocks that I want to mention is living life on your own terms. So a good example of this is found pretty much through the entire book of Numbers. Israel constantly says, okay, God told us to do this, but we're going to do this instead. And it just kind of happens over and over and over again to the point that God finally says, fine, have it your way. You're not going to the promised land. You're going back into the desert. You're going to die out there, and I'm going to bring your kids to the promised land. And then this is what they say when God finally says that. They got up early the next morning and went up the ridge of the hill country, saying, let's go to the place the Lord promised, for we were wrong. Can you hear the hubris behind that? I'm standing on the promises of God. God promises the land. Yeah. Originally he did, but you lost that when you disobeyed. But no, I'm standing on the promises of God, for we were wrong. See, how arrogant is that? He literally just told them the day before, you're not getting in. So without consulting him at all, they just go for it. Amazing, the levels of things that we can convince ourselves. So modern day examples of this. I can treat people however I want. When I'm at the store, at the checkout, I don't have to treat the cashier. I don't have to treat the cashier with respect. I can go out to eat at a restaurant and I can chew off the waitress. It doesn't matter. I can treat people however I want. My spouse, that's God's problem. Was it? I shoot the bullets. God sorts the dead. It's. I can be in a relationship with whoever I want. It doesn't matter if this person is a bad choice, if they're immoral. Hey, there is an attraction. So we're good. And you see this happen. When I was younger, I thought this was a problem of the young. Oh, was I mistaken? This is a problem we get ourselves into all throughout the course of our lives. And, moving on. It's okay if I cause a church conflict. It's okay if I spend my money however I want. It's okay if I, all this stuff, because I live my life for myself. I put myself first. The third of the common blocks. And these things will stop you from God's will. You will ask God, why am I not experiencing your fresh power? Why am I not experiencing your anointing? Why am I hitting all these roadblocks in my life? How come these things just aren't working out? How come I just can't feel like I'm getting anything from you? Well, these 5 things for at least starters. Number 3, getting bad advice. Now, I could have quoted about half the book of Proverbs because it has a lot to say about getting advice, being a fool and being a wise and so on and so forth. But I already brought up Numbers, so we'll just go ahead and stick with that. They're getting ready. Israel's getting ready to go to the promised land that God called them to. They've already seen the amazing things that God did in Egypt. So it's not like, hey, is God really out there or anything? No, they literally just saw it a couple months ago. Nothing like out of the crazy. And they're getting ready to go to the promised land. And they get this idea. We're going to send some spies in first. Oh, this sounds like a good idea. It sounds like a good idea. So they go, and the spies come back, and they give a terrible report. It did not go over well. And this is their response after they got this bad advice in chapter 14, verses 1 and 2. Then the whole community broke into loud cries, and the people wept that night. All the Israelites complained about Moses and Aaron, and the whole community, well, that escalated very quickly. And the whole community told them, if only we had died in the land of Egypt, or if only we had died in this wilderness. It just keeps getting worse. Every line you read gets worse. They're outside of the promise. And okay. They send out spies. Okay. This could still be a good thing. The spies give a bad report. Ooh. They start crying. Now they start complaining about their leaders. And then they're starting wishing that they're back in Egypt as slaves. Now, I've never had the misfortune of being a slave, but I don't think I'd like to go back to it if I had been set free from it. I feel like that wouldn't be on the top of my to-do list. But I guess they were the ones to know. And so common examples that we see of this from, well, I'm actually only going to give you one modern day example, and I'll give you two more biblical examples. One is having gossiping groups, right? These are our girlfriends, right? We get in our spouse with our husband, and we go to our girlfriends, and they tell us what a jerk our husband is. The whole time they're driving a wedge between you and your husband, and it's gossip group. It doesn't do anything, but you blow off some steam and feel better about yourself while you're tearing somebody else down. When you're talking about somebody that's not there and can't defend themselves. Two more examples, and these are from the Bible. There's this guy named King Rehoboam. His father was the wisest man. Talk about hard to follow, right? Hard act to follow. So his son, King Rehoboam, different people from the country come up to him and they say, "Hey, your dad worked us too hard. We're done. We got to work something else out." And King Rehoboam has a really good idea. He goes to his father's counselors and says, "What do you think we should do?" And they say, unanimously, they say the same thing. If you cut him a break now, it's really going to work out for you in the long term. You should listen to them. And he says, that's an idea. Let's see what my high school buddies have to say. So he goes and talks to his friends instead. And they say the exact opposite. They say, no. You need to get him under your thumb, goof. You really need to make sure you assert your authority now so you can really, step up and be the boss. And he's like, hey, that's a good idea. You guys are young. You've obviously had the experience necessary to do this. I'll go with what you said. And so, that's what he does. And there's a civil war. It does not end well for him. A second example is a guy by the name of Amnon, who he was really into his sister, and not like in a supportive way, in a creepy way. And so he decides that he is dropped down in love with this woman. He has to have her, which, he needed to go to Sunday school because, this is not something you need to be doing. And so he goes to his friend and says, hey, I got the feels for my sister. And his friend's like, that's an easy fix. Don't even sweat. Pretend to be sick and then make her. And he's like, that's a good idea. Man, you're coming up with all the best ideas. So he does that. And it ends about as terribly as you would imagine. The sister is shamed for the rest of her life. He ends up getting killed for it. A big family squabble ensues. It doesn't go well. I think you would actually say it went terrible. And this is the cost of getting bad advice in our lives. When we go to people who tell us what we want to hear, and we get ourselves into a problem, instead of finding people who are wise, who've been there, that we could learn from. And so then that takes us to the fourth of the common blocks that we unfortunately step into when we're that block us from God's will, and that's rebelling against authority. Now, this is one of those things that it was overemphasized in the 80s, and then the church went completely to the other side, and they just never talked about authority like ever again. It's one of those things that you never hear people talking about it. And I think maybe an in the middle kind of approach might be a better way to go about it instead of going to extremes. 1 Samuel 15 tells us a story where the king is supposed to obey God and go and fight these enemies and wipe everything out. Burn the city and everything and just wipe it out. And so King Saul goes, and he comes back and he says, "Ha-ha, I did it. I've done what God asked me to do." And so the prophet Samuel says, then why do I hear sheep? And so King Saul says, well, I kept the best to offer to God, of course, because I'm that kind of a guy, And Samuel says, yeah, no, that's not what God told you to do, though. And he says he actually brought the leader of his enemies home, as if that was a good idea. And so Samuel has to put him to death, obviously. And then we get to 1 Samuel 15, and in 22 he says, it's better to obey than to sacrifice. And everybody knows that verse. But right after that verse is this verse, verse 23. For rebellion is like the sin of divination. To rebel is the same as to practicing witchcraft. Those sins are equal. They're the same. You hear people talking about child molesters a lot, but when's the last time you heard people talking about rebellion? See what I mean? This is one of those things we just completely gloss over this verse. But I have to excuse my hand. It's shaking something fierce. I had some some caffeine with on an empty stomach, my hand can't stop shaking. So in this, it's one of those things where we all know about how worshiping. Okay, we know that verse. Okay, obey is better than sacrifice. But then this verse we just completely dismiss. And defiance is like wickedness and idolatry. It's the same as worshiping another god. Being defiant is the same as worshiping another god. This, friends, is a spirit that cannot exist in a thriving, growing church. And yet, it is one of those sins that is oftentimes excused in a church environment. It is not good. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. So some modern day examples, I'm going to throw this out at you. First off, it is not okay to talk bad about your spouse. It is not okay to talk bad about your spouse. That's not okay. It doesn't matter what kind of an argument you had with your spouse this morning. As far as you're concerned, when you get to work, everything's fine. You do not need to confide in other people about what a stupid idiot your spouse is, okay? That needs to be something that's not coming out of your mouth. People need to see you and your spouse on the same page. You don't need to be talking to your kids or your grandkids about your spouse. These are non-negotiables. This kind of rebellion in your own household, you will tear down your house with your own hands. You can't do that. You can't do it to your spouse. You can't do it to your kids. You can't do it to yourself. And you can't do it to God. God expects you to build up your house. Completely unacceptable behavior for that kind of stuff. Number two, it's not okay to talk bad about your pastor or also to talk bad about your parents. This is something, once again, they talked about a lot in the 80s. They just kind of stopped talking about it. You don't need to be talking bad about your parents. Now more than ever, I come into 20 and 30-year-olds who are talking about how all their problems are their parents' fault. They went to counseling and they've had problems. They're on medication now. So it's because their parents did this when they were kids. I am sorry that happened to you. Moving on, you're an adult now. You are responsible for your life from here on out. I am sorry if you had the worst parents in the world. Nothing can be done about it now. But God can take you where you are and move you forward. It's important for your sake that you do not talk bad about your parents. Because Proverbs and other places in the Bible tells us about how there are curses reserved for people who spite their parents. Literally, it says the birds of the the birds of the field will pluck out their eyes. These are things that aren't good for us to be doing. As Christians, we're supposed to be known for the wisdom of our mouths, not the foolishness of our mouths. And sometimes we excuse the rebellion by giving it different cute names. You know what I mean? Like, oh, they're just a little bit stiff-necked. Oh, she's just a little headstrong. Oh, well, he's opinionated. Yeah, well, no. Giving it a cute name doesn't help. The Bible says that this kind of behavior is an opposing a rebellious spirit. You're in opposition to your authority, and that's not a good thing. And by the way, I'm not saying this on my behalf. Like, y'all need to stop talking mean about me. And that's not what I'm talking about at all. For the sake of your well-being, watch out your authority lines. And if you're not under authority, there's a real good chance that God will remove you from authority, because everybody who is placed in authority is under authority. Myself, my team, you, everybody in authority is also under authority. It's just the law of how things work. And the interesting thing, though, about this one is it's, being in rebellion against authority is it's oftentimes caused from a need to try to please people. If you have a weakness of wanting other people to like you, and you're always trying to please people, watch out. It can lead you to rebellion. Just be careful. King Saul had the exact same thing. He wasn't firm enough, and he just went with the winds, and it led him to rebellion. So the fifth of the common blocks that really I see quite a lot is spiritual pride and arrogance. I could say a lot about this, but I'm not going to. I will say that a lot of these are things that I in my own life have had to face. Spiritual pride and arrogance. That one took me years to get over, thinking that I knew everything. It's hard. If you can break free of it, though, you're all in the clear. Making up your mind, that one's hard. Living life on your own terms, that's universally hard. Everybody wants to live life on their own terms. And getting bad advice, that's one I have never struggled with. Because I look at how successful somebody is in an area. And if somebody's successful in an area, and they've got good mouth control, like they're not always gabbing, I know that they're a go-to person. And then I kind of keep a running log in my head of different people who I can go to for different things. And in that way, you'll always have a mentor. So the fifth common block to God's will, spiritual pride and arrogance. In 3 John verse 9, it doesn't have a chapter, but it says this, I wrote something to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to have first place among them, does not receive our authority. This is Diotrephes in direct opposition with John. John, who was the disciple that Jesus loved. John, the guy who's like one of the leaders of the church. And you can read in 1st and 3rd John how the state of the church is getting worse and worse. But I'll leave that up to you. And so you see a couple examples of this in the modern day. It's very common with staff to kind of have the idea of, I'm more spiritual than the pastor. We don't say it like that because we know that sounds bad. But for instance, when there's an associate pastor and a senior pastor, oftentimes the associate pastor will get caught up in criticizing the senior pastor because we think we're more spiritual. Yeah, they should do it like that. I don't know why he doesn't do that. I know everything because I've never once been a senior pastor. I used to think that I knew everything too. And then I became a senior pastor. Now I'm trying to find out if there's anything I actually do know. I'm like, well, I thought I knew that. I'm not so sure about that. Another thing is when you kind of have this idea that you're more spiritual than your spouse, right? So I'm the spiritual one. I just have to put up with him. Oh, well, she hasn't learned to shut her mouth yet. I'm the spiritual one. That can really get you in trouble in a lot of ways, not to mention your kids. Really can get you in trouble with your kids. But anyways, moving on. It's this idea, this whole idea, I'm right, I won't change, I don't have to learn, you're just going to have to step around me. That's called being pig-headed. That doesn't work if you want to see things change and grow. And this is the problem that I experience a lot, is there's always this idea, I have a discerning spirit. I have a discerning spirit. God has just, enlightened me that I'm able to discern things better than you common people. And here's the problem. In this discerning spirit, what is the fruit? What is the fruit of your discerning spirit? Does your discernment lead to divisiveness in the church? Does your discernment lead to you being able to sin, but it's okay because it's you? I actually talked to somebody who said that they had a discerning spirit from God and they were living with a girl that they weren't married. Is that discernment? No, it's not. It's like Solomon says this. He says, I was really wise and I started do these really stupid things. This is in the book of Ecclesiastes. I started doing these really stupid things and sinning. Yeah. That's not wisdom. In fact, Proverbs tells us this. Wisdom is to fear the Lord. That's the beginning of wisdom. Living in sin, that's not wisdom. That's actually foolishness. Another thing that you see people who have a discerning spirit do, they never get buckled into a church. They just hop from church to church. Because they're too spiritual for the pastors. They're too spiritual to be submitted to that church. They're too spiritual to be corrected. They're too spiritual for any of that. I'm too spiritual for it. I don't need it. I've got a discerning spirit. And when that is the fruit of your discernment, you have to be honest with yourself and realize that is not discernment from the Holy Spirit. That is delusion from the demonic world. When I was trying to weigh where to go next in life, I knew that God was moving me from being an associate pastor. I knew that. But I didn't know where. So I felt God stirring, but I didn't see where. And I was in a place of not being clear because God wasn't speaking clearly. He wasn't saying, go and do this or go and do that. And to make matters worse, I was very emotionally and spiritually exhausted. I was tired. So I wanted to go to one of two extremes. Number one, I wanted to just stay. Instead of fooling with it, forget God's will. I'm comfortable here. Everything's familiar. I don't have to take any risks. I can just stay here and be comfortable. And then the second extreme that I went to was kind of the exact opposite side of the spectrum, where I was saying something along the lines of this. I'm just going to run far away. Move as far away from here as I can. Who cares what God's will is? See, both things were not focused on God's will. It was focused on, I'm really tired. I'm tired of dealing with this. I'm tired of this. I'm done. See? And then with the added stress of God not being clear, God's will was not clear to me. And so instead of reading the Bible, I was looking for mystical signs. God, if you want me to do this, that you would cause it to be rainy today. Or, yeah, I mean, you guys have probably all done it before in your own life, looking for little signs to validate what is God's will and what's not God's will. Should I do this or should I not do that? When a lot of times God just kind of, well, we'll get to that later. Next week, actually, we'll get to that. And so I just want to encourage you with this. Finding God's will is something that is not an event. It is a journey. And it's not one that you have to really stress out too much about. You just have to trust God in that journey. So next week, we'll start looking about what's God's will for you, generally speaking. Not you specifically, but generally what's God's will for you. And then after that, we'll look at God's specific will for you individually. But tonight, this morning, I guess I should say, there are at least 3 things that I can say what we can take away from this. The first thing, your attitude, your lifestyle, these things block God's will for you. If you want God's will for your life, focus on your heart. God cares more for your character than your productivity. He cares more about the journey than he does the destination. See, we get concerned about, where am I going, God? But God cares more about, who are you? That's what he cares about. And so he wants to rewrite our character. We just want him to fix the story. This story's broken, God. I want to get to the end of the book. And God's saying, well, hold on. I'm trying to work on your heart. We say the ends justify the means. God says the means are a little bit more important than the end. So let God change your character. The second thing that I think we can kind of take away from this, from Gideon and whatnot, be okay with not having all the answers. Be okay with not knowing what's coming. Don't try to test God or force an answer from him with signs and feelings and fleeces. And then the third final thing that I think we can take away from this, you see Gideon as a man who constantly puts God to the test, asking for signs after signs, even with the point that God is talking to him and he says, give me a sign that you're talking to me. And even though Deuteronomy was very, very clear not to do this, you see God was patient with Gideon. He didn't strike him down. He didn't curse him. And I think this is a very important lesson. God is patient with our struggles. If you feel like you're a screw-up, hey, don't worry too much. God's in the business of using screw-ups. And even when we are slow to trust God, he still has a way of working it out. As we get ready to close in prayer, kids, I just want to leave you with this. God will guide your life. Don't stress about it. Don't worry. God will guide your life. Your job is just to trust. You are not an accident. You are made on purpose, and God will guide your life. Please join me in prayer. Lord, I pray for those who are struggling with your will. Maybe they're just not real happy with how things have gone in their life. Maybe they're just really having a hard time trusting you in this season. Maybe they're having a hard time trying to figure out what they should do and where they should go. Lord, I just pray you touch their hearts and remind them that you actually do care, that you keep record of their tears, that you see what they're going through, that you're a God who hears, you're a God who listens, you're a God who speaks, you're a God who can give peace. So Lord, I pray that as you guide them through these situations, that you would give them wisdom and that you would give them patience as you're working through the journey. As you grow their character, as you grow their heart, you would give them patience for the journey ahead. And I pray that you'd keep doing your work, Lord, and that as they read their Bibles, you would show them new things that they've never seen before. As they pray, that you would speak to them in a way that you never have before. That they would move past just getting a quick, easy answer and enter into the messiness of seeking you with their whole heart. And I pray you'd bless them and guide them and direct them.